On the outskirts of a small neighborhood stood an old building surrounded by a rusty fence. It was the local shelter for stray animals, a place where dozens of dogs and cats abandoned or lost in the big city found a home. Initially, the shelter was a true haven of mercy, where locals brought their donations and came to take home a new friend. But over time, financial difficulties, lack of funding, and indifference began to turn this corner of care into ruins. The walls of the building were barely holding up, the roof was leaking in the rains, and the staff was reduced to a few volunteers who were working tirelessly to take care of all the animals. Food was scarce, medicines were running out, and most of the animal cages had long been in need of repair. Everyone realized that if nothing changed, the shelter would close. Local residents who still supported it tried to help, but their resources were not enough to save the situation. The children were the most worried. For many of them, the shelter had become a favorite place where they could come and spend time with the animals they couldn't keep at home. Each child knew at least one dog or cat by name, and each had a favorite story about how these animals came to be here. They saw both pain and hope in the eyes of these creatures. And when the news of the possible closure of the shelter spread through the neighborhood, it was the children who decided to act. A group of school children, led by high school student Thomas, gathered in a vacant lot near the shelter. They decided that they could not let the shelter close. Thomas, who has always had an entrepreneurial spirit, suggested the idea of organizing a car wash to raise money for the animals. Everyone supported his plan. Each of them wanted to do their part to save the place that meant so much to them. Starting with a small corner on the street, the children put up homemade posters with messages urging drivers to support their cause. They used old sponges, buckets of water, and ordinary dishwashing detergent. One of the parents brought a hose to help water the cars. The whole process was simple, but the children put all their energy into it. They worked from morning to evening, despite the heat or rain. The first days were hard. Only a few cars stopped to support them, and the money raised was not enough to cover even one small need of the shelter. But the children did not give up. They decided to make their campaign more visible. Thomas and his friends designed more colorful posters, and one of their parents even printed out information about the shelter, which they handed out to drivers. Over time, the campaign began to attract more attention. Local residents, having learned about the children's initiative, began to support them by bringing water, snacks, and helping to wash the cars. Adults took pictures of the children, shared their story on social media, and the number of people willing to help increased. Now the car wash has turned into a real event that united the neighborhood around one goal. However, even with such enthusiasm, the children realized that the money they raised was not enough to cover the huge debts of the shelter. They tried not to lose hope, but deep down, each of them realized how big the problem was. Although the animals in the shelter continued to receive at least some help thanks to their efforts, it was not enough to change the situation. One hot day, when the children were working at another car wash, an event happened that changed everything. A black car was driving down the street and suddenly stopped next to their makeshift playground. The driver rolled down the window, and a man in dark glasses and a baseball cap got out. It was Keanu Reeves, returning from a meeting in the city. His attention was drawn to a group of children who were working under the scorching sun and smilingly inviting the driver to support them. Keanu drove closer to find out what the children were doing. He looked closely at their posters, which read about saving the animal shelter. After witnessing their efforts, he decided to stop and support their cause. The man handed the children money, asking them to use it for the shelter, but stayed nearby, watching them work. The children, not knowing who exactly had stopped, accepted his help with gratitude. They continued to work, oblivious to Keanu's staying nearby, watching their dedication. His heart was touched that such a young group of people would do anything to help those who could not help themselves. When Keanu Reeves stayed at the makeshift car wash, his eyes never left the children. He watched as they worked with inexhaustible enthusiasm despite their fatigue. Every movement of these young benefactors radiated hope, dedication, and faith that their efforts could change the fate of the animal shelter. This picture touched him to the core. For him, It was a reminder that even the smallest actions can have a big impact. Keanu decided to get closer to learn more about the situation. In his usual modest manner, he did not reveal his identity, appearing to the children as an ordinary well-wisher. His appearance did not cause a stir, and this allowed him to talk calmly with the young activists. He began to ask them about the shelter and why they decided to organize such an action. The children told him how they had learned about the difficult situation of the shelter. They described the conditions in which the animals were kept: old cages, lack of food and medicine. The shelter had only a few volunteers who could barely cope with their daily tasks. According to the children, the shelter has always been important to their neighborhood. It has become a place where many have found a friend or even felt useful by helping animals. One of the boys, Thomas, explained how they found out about the shelter's debts. It turned out that the building could no longer cover its expenses. The director, who had worked there for more than a decade, had to ask local residents for help, but it was not enough. Thomas said that it was this information that prompted him and his friends to start the campaign, because they could not stand by while the fate of the animals hung in the balance. Keanu listened attentively, not interrupting. Every word the children said made him sure that he was not here by chance. He saw in these children a strength that could inspire others. Their honesty and dedication were impressive. At the same time, he felt a burden of responsibility, realizing that the children's efforts alone could not save the orphanage. After their story, Keanu asked them about the location of the shelter. The children, unaware that the famous actor was standing in front of them, described the road and details that could help them find the building. His desire to visit the place made the children think that he might want to help himself, or at least verify what they said. The next day, Keanu set out for the shelter. When he arrived, he saw a picture that confirmed everything the children had said. The building looked dilapidated, the fence was rusted, and the grounds were littered with garbage. Inside, things were even worse. Old cages, animals that looked emaciated, and only a few volunteers doing their best to keep the shelter alive. Keanu walked around the grounds, observing the animals and their condition. He noticed a few dogs that came up to him as if they sensed his kindness. Their sad look touched his heart. He saw cats hiding in the shadows, trying to find some peace. The volunteers, seeing the stranger, greeted him, but did not attach much importance to it, because they were used to visitors coming and then leaving without leaving anything. After inspecting everything, Keanu talked to the director of the shelter. She told him about all the difficulties they face every day. Her eyes were full of fatigue, but at the same time, she believed that somehow the situation would change. She showed him documents that confirmed the huge debts of the shelter. The amount was so large that even with the support of the community, it looked like an impossible task. After the conversation, Keanu left the shelter, but his thoughts did not leave him. He realized that only large-scale help could save this place. For him, it was more than just an opportunity to support animals. It was a chance to show that even in the most difficult conditions, solutions can be found. He knew he could not stand by and decided to act. Upon returning home, Keanu began to draw up a plan. He decided that the assistance should be comprehensive. It was necessary not only to cover the debts, but also to create conditions that would allow the shelter to function sustainably in the future. He turned to his financial advisor, who could help with organizing such large donations. To begin with, Keanu decided to remain anonymous. His goal was not to receive praise, but to save a place that had become a symbol of hope for children and animals. He contacted several organizations that specialized in helping shelters and began preparing for big changes. He did all this with the same humility that has always characterized him. Keanu realized that this was just the beginning of a long journey, but he was ready to do everything to ensure that the shelter not only survived, but also became a place that would inspire others. This project became more than just charity for him. It was about humanity, kindness, and a desire to change the world for the better. After visiting the shelter, Keanu Reeves could not shake the feeling that he had to act immediately. He realized that the task required not only financial support, but also structural changes that would make the shelter sustainable in the long run. So he decided to approach the problem systematically. The first thing Keanu did was to set up an anonymous fund to support the shelter. This fund was to ensure complete transparency of funding, so that every dollar was spent exclusively for the benefit of the animals. Through his trustees, he began to study the financial situation of the shelter. Keanu commissioned a professional accountant to assess debts, regular expenses, and potential sources of income. This allowed him to get a clear picture of what was needed for the shelter to operate sustainably. At the same time, he turned to friends who had experience in setting up and running similar institutions. They provided him with valuable advice, including how to optimize costs, find new sources of funding, and attract more volunteers. Based on the findings, Keanu developed a plan that included several key steps. 1. Paying off debts. This was the first and most important step, as without it the shelter risked losing the building and the ability to continue operating. 2. Renovation and modernization. Keanu wanted the shelter to become a place that would provide animals with decent conditions. To do this, he had to replace old cages, repair the roof, set up separate areas for different types of animals, and create a cozy room for visitors who come to adopt an animal. 3. Hiring professional staff. Volunteers were doing a great job, but the shelter lacked professional veterinarians and caretakers. Keanu decided that it was necessary to provide decent pay for employees with experience in animal care. 4. Educational programs. To ensure that the shelter could benefit the community, he decided to implement programs that would educate local residents about proper animal care and engage children in volunteering. 5. Searching for permanent sponsors. Keanu realized that his support could not be endless. Therefore, one of the main tasks was to involve local businesses and charitable organizations in regular assistance to the shelter. To implement this plan, he turned to construction companies that agreed to carry out repairs at reduced prices. They assessed the extent of the damage and made an estimate. Keanu also ordered new equipment for the shelter, including modern cages, medical equipment, animal care supplies, and play areas. At the same time, he began searching for veterinarians and managers who could ensure the effective operation of the shelter. He offered them a decent salary that would incentivize them to work for the benefit of animals. One of the important decisions was to create a training program for volunteers so that they could better care for the animals and help visitors with the adoption process. Keanu also decided that the shelter should become not only a place for animals, but also a center for community involvement. He organized meetings with local activists and entrepreneurs to discuss the possibility of support. The idea of holding regular events, such as fairs, workshops, and charity concerts, was proposed to raise funds and popularize the idea of helping homeless animals. In addition, Keanu launched a media campaign to draw attention to the problem of stray animals. He did not mention himself in these initiatives, remaining in the shadows, but used his popularity to attract influential people and media to cover the situation. Social networks were filled with posts about the shelter, and stories about animals who found new homes inspired people to participate in charity. The work to save the shelter lasted several months. Keanu received regular progress reports. Each new step, each small victory gave him confidence that he had chosen the right path. Despite the difficulties, he kept going, knowing that this project would change the lives of many animals and people. Renovation work at the shelter began at dawn. The workers of the construction company hired by Keanu Reeves quickly got to work. The old building, which had remained in a state of disrepair for many years, was gradually changing. The leaking roof was replaced with a new one made of modern materials that could withstand any weather. The walls were cleaned of mold and repainted in warm, pleasant colors. Now the shelter looked not only functional, but also friendly. The cages that were old and uncomfortable for the animals were replaced with spacious, safe modules. Dogs got special areas for walking where they could run and play. Cats were provided with rooms with comfortable shelves where they could climb, as well as quiet corners to rest. Particular attention was paid to the infrastructure for animals with special needs. Special rooms for rehabilitation and separate enclosures for those who needed peace of mind were equipped. The volunteers did not leave the shelter during the construction work. They worked alongside, helping to move animals, clean the territory, and organize temporary conditions for the four-legged residents. Among them were children who tried to do their best to help. They took care of the animals, prepared food for them, and even organized small play programs for the dogs so that they did not experience stress due to noise and changes. Every day, the shelter was becoming more and more like the place its employees and visitors dreamed of. The new amenities were impressive. Modern medical equipment appeared in the veterinary area. Ultrasound machines, instruments for surgical interventions, and everything necessary for emergency care. These changes were made possible thanks to Keanu's support, but no one at the shelter ever knew who was behind the transformation. Despite his anonymity, Keanu regularly received reports on how the reconstruction was progressing. The photos of the renovated premises and the happy animals, who now had comfortable conditions, brought him pleasure. He was particularly impressed by a picture of a dog named Bruno, a large mastiff who had always looked sad in his old cage, but was now running happily in the new playground. It was a symbol of the changes he wanted to make. In addition to infrastructure, attention was paid to educational initiatives. Volunteers involved in the project began holding open lessons for children and adults. Topics ranged from proper animal care to the ethical aspects of adoption. The goal of these classes was to raise the awareness of local residents about stray animals. The shelter began to hold fairs where people could buy handmade products made by volunteers. Part of the proceeds from the sales were used to maintain the shelter. These events also served as a platform for community communication, networking, and recruiting new volunteers. The key point in the changes was the improvement of the animal adoption system. Thanks to the new conditions and active work with the media, more and more people learned about the shelter. Keanu personally contributed to the creation of video stories about animals looking for new homes. These videos told about the unique personalities of dogs and cats, their habits and peculiarities. This allowed people to see animals not just as an object for help, but as future friends. One of the most important moments occurred during the opening of the renovated shelter. Everyone who supported the project was invited to this event. Volunteers, employees, children, and even those who had ever participated in the shelter's life. The atmosphere was festive. At the entrance, the guests were greeted by dogs wagging their tails happily, and the cats, settled in their new rooms, watched everything through the large windows. The children who started this journey with a simple car wash were now at the forefront. They told stories about how the shelter was changing, how they themselves were able to grow thanks to this initiative. Their words inspired others. It was obvious that this project was not only a rescue for the animals, but also a lesson in the power of compassion and teamwork. During the event, the director of the shelter spoke with words of gratitude. She told how it all started, how difficult it was to work in the old conditions, and how incredible the changes have become. Her speech touched everyone present. But the most important moment was when she admitted that they still don't know who helped make all these changes. Keanu, who remained in the shadows throughout the event, watched from a distance. It was enough for him to see how people unite, how animals get a chance for a new life. For him, it was the greatest gift. A few weeks have passed since the official opening of the renovated shelter. Life in the shelter was in full swing, and every day people came here to see the changes, support the volunteers, or find a new four-legged friend. And although the project was a huge success, the main question still remained unanswered. Who was behind these changes? No one, except a few people close to Keanu, knew the truth, and this only increased the intrigue. The children who started this initiative with their car wash were now active volunteers at the shelter. Their work changed. They not only took care of the animals, but also helped the new owners adapt to the role of guardians. Thomas, who had once organized a car wash, began studying veterinary medicine, dreaming of becoming a doctor for animals. Other children were also inspired by the results they saw. One day, a group of children decided to put together all the pieces of the story to understand how the shelter had managed to change so radically. They asked the volunteers, staff, and local residents who were involved in the project. With each new story, they received pieces of the puzzle that began to form a single picture. One of the volunteers recalled that during the renovation of the building, material suppliers often asked if their customer was still working. She could not understand who they were talking about because all organizational issues were resolved anonymously. Another volunteer shared that he had seen a man wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses who came to the construction site from time to time to observe the progress. He added that this person always kept to himself and never spoke to the workers. These references only increased the children's curiosity. They began to analyze these facts and remembered how a man had approached them during their car wash and listened attentively to their story about the shelter. They remembered his simple clothes and warm gaze. And although they didn't pay much attention to it at the time, they now realized that this encounter was a key moment. One evening, Thomas was looking through photos taken during the renovation of the shelter that had been posted on social media. In one of the pictures, taken by accident, he saw a familiar silhouette. A man wearing a baseball cap stood a little to the side, watching the workers. Thomas took a closer look at the photo and felt his heart clench with excitement. He immediately realized who it was. The next day, Thomas shared his discovery with his friends. They began to look for more information about Keanu Reeves and learned that he is known for his good deeds, which he usually does without much publicity. They found many stories about how he helped people and organizations while remaining in the shadows. These facts only confirmed their suspicions. The children decided they had to find a way to thank Keanu. They realized that he probably wouldn't want public recognition, so they decided to do it in a way that would stay within his style, quietly and with sincerity. They organized a short video where they talked about how their shelter had changed, how it had affected their lives and the lives of the animals. They did not mention names, but left a message of gratitude to the person who made it possible. Keanu received this video through his representatives. He watched it in the silence of his home, and his eyes filled with tears. For him, it was the best recognition. He knew that his help made a difference and left a mark on the lives of these children and animals. Despite everything, he decided not to reveal his identity. The shelter continued to thrive. People came to adopt animals, and each of them remained inspired by the atmosphere created by the children, volunteers, and the invisible benefactor. And although Keanu Reeves' name was never officially named, his influence was felt in every smile, every happy look of the rescued animal. As the months passed, the shelter became more and more popular. It turned into not only a place where one could find a friend among stray animals, but also a symbol of community unity. Everyone who passed through its doors felt a special atmosphere of care and compassion. Thanks to the initiatives of the children, volunteers, and all the people who cared, the shelter was able not only to resume its activities, but also to exceed all expectations. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves remained in the shadows, as he always did. He continued to follow the shelter's progress through reports sent to him by its trustees. He received photos of smiling children, happy owners who took animals home, and the pets themselves who finally found comfort and love. Each of these stories filled his heart with warmth. Keanu did not consider his contribution to be something out of the ordinary. For him, it was a natural extension of his belief that the world changes through good deeds. He knew that the true essence of charity is not recognition, but a real impact on the lives of others. One day, Keanu received an unexpected message. It was a letter from Thomas, a boy who had once led a car washing campaign. In the letter, Thomas was thankful for what the shelter had done for their neighborhood. He wrote how this place changed his life and inspired him to dedicate his future to helping animals. Although there was no direct reference to Keanu in the letter, it was clear that Thomas had guessed who the benefactor was. Keanu read the letter several times. He was touched by the sincerity and gratitude that could be read between the lines. He decided to respond, but he did so in his own style, no name, no signature. He sent Thomas a short message encouraging him to keep going and continue his good work. This exchange was a confirmation for Keanu that his actions had a profound impact. Over time, the shelter began to receive even more support from the local community. Charity events organized by volunteers became regular, and each one raised more and more money. Local businesses inspired by the success began to help. Some supplied food for the animals, others offered free veterinary services, and some even organized courses for those who were adopting animals for the first time. Keanu watched all this with pleasure. He saw his initial gesture grow into a movement that brought people together. The shelter became an example of how one person can inspire hundreds of others to do good deeds. But that was enough for him. He did not need words of gratitude or public recognition. One day, when the shelter was celebrating its one-year anniversary after the reconstruction, the director decided to write a post on social media. She mentioned the anonymous benefactor who saved their shelter and thanked him for everything. The post went viral, and many people began to express their gratitude in the comments, without even knowing who they were addressing. Among these comments was one from a name that few people could recognize. The true power of kindness lies in its ability to inspire others. Keep changing the world, one kind act at a time, Keanu wrote. This comment quickly disappeared, but those who saw it realized that it had a special meaning. The shelter continued to live and develop. Its story became an inspiration for others, and its inhabitants, both humans and animals, found a new meaning in life. And somewhere in the shadows, there was a man who made this possible, seeking nothing in return, only a sincere feeling that the world had become a little better.